My name is Carson, and this is On Air with Heritage Action, a podcast built for conservatives. Twice a week, we break down some of the most important issues facing our country and talk about how you can get involved today in the fight for conservative values. We're back talking about the Omnibus with RJ Gibson, the Director of Government Relations at Heritage Action. RJ, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So we've been hearing a lot about the Omnibus for a long time. We've been advocating for a short-term CR into the first quarter of 2023. Obviously, a lot's been happening. There's been a ton in the news. Can you explain some of the dynamics that are happening in Congress right now?
Yeah, for sure. So a well-functioning Congress would pass a bill at the end of September or before then to fund the next fiscal year. But because this is not a well-functioning Congress, it hasn't been for a while, they've kicked the deadline all the way up until now to fund the government. So the government is about to be unfunded, which would induce a government shutdown. As we know, Christmas is almost here. Lawmakers would like to go home, and so they're scrambling right now to find an adequate way to keep the government from shutting down.
Right. So if the government's going to run out of funding shortly, what does that mean the next step in this whole process is, or what are the options at least?
Excuse me. There's a couple options. So what we've been advocating for, as you said, is a continuing resolution into next year, which would allow the next Congress, which would have Republican leadership in the House, to write the appropriations bills. So that's one option. Another option is to pass a short-term continuing resolution into next week, which would move the deadline even closer to Christmas and increase pressure even more to keep the government from shutting down, which would allow essentially more time for folks who would like to see what we refer to as an omnibus spending bill figure out how to get one passed.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the December 23rd option a little bit more. So if that happens, how does that set up the omnibus? Like, is that helpful or harmful, or what's the point of this December 23rd?
Yeah, so essentially, as I said at the beginning, they've struggled to fund the government for quite some time now, and so they're still trying to hash out a deal to figure out how to set funding levels for the various programs spread around the federal government, from defense to the Department of Energy to the Department of Education. Pick an agency; they all need to be funded, and there's debates on how high they should be funded. And so they essentially still don't have a deal on that, and so they think they're really close. That last night they announced they had an agreement on top line spending numbers for domestic spending and defense spending, but of course they wouldn't tell anybody what they were. And so they think with one more week of a continuing resolution that they can get to a deal on an omnibus, which would set new funding levels.
Yeah, so they're basically just going to kick the can down the road again so that they have more time to draft this horrible big omnibus that everyone's going to hate.
And of course, December 23rd is closer to Christmas, which increases the pressure on lawmakers who want to get home, on lawmakers who don't want to look like they're shutting down the government before Christmas, which can gain you some negative press. So
yeah, and we've seen this before.
You see this pretty much every year.
Yeah, they use Christmas as like an excuse to be like, oh, well, you have to do this before you can go home, and you're going to be the Grinch who stole Christmas if you
don't
do
vote
your
for
job
our
right.
bill.
Right.
That is full of terrible things.
Right, exactly. So on Wednesday, Kevin McCarthy announced his opposition to an omnibus package, and then a ton of conservatives in the House have already come out really adamantly opposed to any long-term spending bill drafted by a lame duck Congress. What's been going on in the Senate? I know there's been a lot of activity.
Yeah, so I think first, it's important to note that we're happy to see McCarthy come out and make those statements. And to see that there's not a lot of appetite in the House for passing an omnibus, and that they support our position. But because they're in the minority in the House, they don't have a lot of leverage, and so they've really been left out of this whole debate. And so this is really largely a Senate exercise. Democrats need to get 10 or more Republicans to go along with their omnibus spending package in order to overcome the filibuster. And so if they're able to do that, Democrats in the House can pass it without any help from Republicans. And so it does help that House Republicans are largely opposed because it keeps pressure on their colleagues in the Senate to be opposed. But again, this is really largely a Senate fight where you have retiring members who are less easily persuaded, and they want to sign off on one more funding bill before they leave, and secure legacy projects. And there's a myriad of reasons why members might vote for this bill, this package, and they're mostly all bad.
Yeah, and there are a lot of conservative senators who have come out too, like Mike Lee, for example.
Mm-hmm.
He did a lot on the funding fight this week. Can you kind of talk about his
efforts?
Yeah,
there's been a group of good conservative senators who have led efforts to pass a continuing resolution into next year that we would like to see. Senators like Mike Lee, like Mike Braun, Ron Johnson, Rick Scott. There's a host of them. I'm sure I'm leaving some off, and I'm sure we've been covering them on social media and giving them praise and that they deserve. So definitely continue to encourage those folks because they're taking a stand that's important, that is really critical to the future of the fiscal stability of the country.
Right. So let's say the establishment and the Lame-Duck Congress and the left, they all get their way and we get this omnibus spending bill. Mm-hmm. What are some of the more egregious things that we can expect to be included in that kind of package?
Well, perhaps one of the most egregious things is we don't know because they won't even tell us what the spending levels are going to be.
Which is ridiculous.
Which, is egregious on its own. But, I think based on past spending packages that we've seen come together in this way, we can make some educated guesses that it's going to be full of earmarks for special projects, pet projects in, powerful members' districts. Like, perhaps there'll be funding for a park in Nancy Pelosi's district that in a year will bear her name.
Right. And to the tune of like billions of dollars,
yes,
right? Like it's not just like
billions
little.
Of dollars in earmarks, yeah. DEI initiatives will be spread throughout the federal agencies. And then, I think it's also important to remember what these bills don't do. They won't do anything to help stop the Biden administration's total abdication of securing the border. They won't do anything to prevent the Biden administration from spending money to help service members travel to get abortions through the Department of Defense or at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And so those are fights that we should and want to have in funding battles, and they're fights that I think we can win, but we can't win until the next House majority gets here and has a seat at the table. And so that's why we want to see this continuing resolution go into the next year, because it will give conservatives a seat at the table where we can have those fights and where we can win those fights.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, just for like a point of clarification, because there's so many terms kind of everywhere, like in the news reports and everything. Can you just talk about the difference between like a CR, continuing resolution, or an omnibus, and kind of why the clean CR, continuing resolution option is better for the American people? I know you kind of already have. But.
No, it's all very confusing, so I'm happy to kind of lay it out a little bit. So continuing resolution just continues the current funding levels that were set during the last omnibus, which passed, I think, in May. And so it would continue those funding levels, until the date that it is set to expire, at which case there's another funding deadline like we're currently facing. We're actually running on a CR right now. And so we were actually generally, as conservatives, opposed to continuing resolutions. I think it's important for the government to set its funding priorities each year. They're not good for the Department of Defense and in military readiness. And so while we're generally opposed, in this case, it's a short-term continuing resolution into the next Congress is the best of lots of bad options, because like I said, it'll allow conservatives to have a seat at the table. if we pass an omnibus now, that will last for the rest of the fiscal year, which ends September 30th. And so that will an omnibus would set new funding levels. Normally, it's not a good way to fund the government either. Normally, the appropriations process works by each subcommittee that passes. There's different bills that fund the Department of Defense, that fund the Department of Energy, that fund the VA, and so we used to pass bills that funded each of those individually, and it let us address the concerns of those individually. It let members that sat on those committees with expertise weigh in on what those folks needed and to run more efficiently. And now an omnibus is when essentially party leaders, appropriations chairman and ranking members all get in a room. They all hash out what they want. They put it to paper, and then they say, vote for this or shut the government down. And that's what we're going to end up with.
Right. So what I'm kind of hearing, too, is just like the Democrats and the left-wingers who control government or Congress now, they're going to be able to just fund their priorities for another year, even when the new Congress comes in with different leadership.
Absolutely, yeah. So Republicans will be stuck with these funding levels until September 30th, and so we won't even be able to have these fights until then.
Yeah, so they're just kind of prolonging their control even after the American people rejected it.
Yes,
at the ballot box.
Nancy Pelosi will no longer be Speaker in January, and yet her funding priorities will be there until the end of September, and then potentially longer, because as we've seen, Congress has been very bad about passing appropriations bills, and so we could be stuck with continuing resolutions during divided government and end up with these funding priorities for the next 2 years until the next elections. And so it really is an inflection point right now for us to get off this train of insane spending.
Yeah, and there's obviously a lot at stake. I mean, is there even any sort of precedent for Congress to pass an omnibus of this magnitude during a lame duck session?
So there's not. Since 1994, control of the House has changed 4 times in midterm elections, and there's never been an outgoing majority that has passed an omnibus during the lame duck. And so this would be totally unprecedented. It would be, just a huge power grab by an outgoing House majority to essentially steal an opportunity for the incoming Republican majority to have a seat at the table.
Yeah, and if there's anything we know about the left is that they love power grabs. So what can those watching and listening at home do? Obviously, there's been a lot of movement over the last few weeks and months even, but what's really important for grassroots activists to be engaging on? Like, who are the conservative warriors that we can applaud, and who are the folks that we need to be contacting and telling them how we feel?
Yeah, I think encouragement for the folks we talked about, for other conservative members who have spoken out against passing an omnibus in the lame duck. Certainly those in the House is all warranted. And I think calling members who haven't made that pledge, who have voted for omnibuses in the past, I think letting those folks know that this is not what you wanted when you sent a conservative majority to the House of Representatives, that this is not what you wanted when you went to the ballot box, and that what you want is for them not to run up the debt now, and essentially bankrupt their children and your children's future. That's what we're talking about. So I think reminding those folks why the last elections went the way they went, and is a good place to start.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you should always be contacting your representatives about big pieces of legislation like this, but if you haven't seen a statement from your representative, from your senator on what they intend to do with this funding fight, this is one of the most important fights that we're going to have.
If you haven't seen them out front talking about this, they're definitely considering voting for it.
Yeah. So call them, get a straight answer from them. If they vote the wrong way, hold them accountable. But it's really up to us to do everything we can to persuade those who haven't come out and tell them how we feel. So RJ, thanks for coming on, and keep us posted about what happens with the omnibus and the next steps that we'll be able to take after Christmas.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
That's it for another episode of On Air with Heritage Action. Thank you for tuning in. If you like what you heard in today's episode, please click the follow button. If you want to receive a text message each time a new episode airs, text podcast to 51776 and you'll never miss an episode. That's podcast to 51776. Hi, it's me again, and we need your help. If you like the insights and activist resources we are providing, please take 1 minute and help us spread the word. Share this episode with friends and family on social media, email, or text. We need everyone's help in the fight to hold Washington accountable. And don't forget, you are also able to subscribe and listen to episodes on your smartphone. Just open up your favorite podcast app and search for On Air with Heritage Action. Click subscribe and download episodes so that you can take them with you on the go. It's the best way to make sure you never miss a thing. Thanks.